So now we're going to get into the rise of Nazism and Adolf Hitler in Germany and their impact on German foreign policy, or at least get through the first part of this lecture. We'll finish in a couple days. I want to start with talking a little bit about the First World War and make sure you guys all recognize a really important aspect to the end of the First World War that we'll be able to contrast with the end of the Second World War in a couple months. Despite the terrible losses that the German army will suffer in the First World War, they will never be pushed back into Germany at the end of that war, by the end of World War I. German armies surrender on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. They sign that armistice, that ceasefire, to end the fighting in World War I, while they're still in Belgium and they're still in France. So the German armies surrender before any of those armies are ever pushed back into Germany proper. The military leadership of Germany knew the war was over. They knew that fighting on for more weeks or months would not lead to German victory. In fact, quite the opposite. With the United States now fully committed to World War I and our manpower and our resources entering the war without limit, the German army would have been pushed back into Germany had the war continued for more months. The nation was teetering on the brink. There were strikes. The industry were striking. Political unrest. The Kaiser, the King of England, had abdicated, or the King of Germany had abdicated his throne. There was a mutiny of the German Navy taking place. There were food shortages. So the writing was on the wall. The German military was being defeated. They just hadn't been driven back into Germany yet. And so the new German government and the German high command of their military recognized that ending the war while German armies were still in Belgium and still in France might result in a better treaty negotiation for the German state. Rather than waiting until they were truly invaded, then they would have maybe got the worst conditions out of any negotiation. The German military had hoped that some treaty would be based on Woodrow Wilson's 14 points. That sounded pretty good for Germany. So get out of the war now. This would come as a shock to many Germans who believed, because their government was telling them this, that they were winning the war. German propaganda didn't let the people in the country know truly how badly the war was going on the Western Front. And so this gives birth to a theory amongst many of the former German military and some in Germany itself of what is called the stab in the back theory. A stab in the back is figuratively, right? Someone betrays you. They stab you in the back. So the stab in the back theory for Germany after World War I is that the new German government, which was a socialist-leaning government with many Jewish people in it, is going to be used by racists within Germany and former military within Germany, and sometimes those lines are blurred between the two of them, as an excuse to believe that the German military never really lost the war, that it was only politicians out for their own benefits that ended the war effort, and that the German army and the German people were stabbed in their backs. So it's a belief that the war wasn't really lost, but just that the army was betrayed. That the German military was actually maybe even close to winning the First World War when they were forced out of the war by these betraying politicians. Cool? Yeah. It's called the stab in the back theory. It's called the stab in the back theory. All right. Now we're going to get to the end of the war, and I want to talk about the Treaty of Versailles. And I know you guys know a lot of this, but I just want to run through again. You talked about it last year, I'm sure. I want to run through again the series of punishments that the German state would face with the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles is a compromise agreement between the victors of the First World War. So those victors are France, Britain, and the United States. And we can count Italy too, I guess. But Japan also counted? They wanted to be counted, but they weren't really in the negotiations, in the serious negotiations. Remember, a compromise is an agreement where everyone agrees that nobody is going to be happy with the result. All right? When you compromise, you give up some of what you really wanted. And this leads to possibly disastrous results for the Treaty of Versailles. At the Versailles Treaty, or at the Paris Peace Conference that gives us the Treaty of Versailles, France has an agenda. And what do you think France wants out of this negotiated treaty?
Total destruction.
Very good. They want the absolute destruction of Germany's ability to ever wage war against France again. And this is really important for France because now they're dealing with 2 wars from Germany in the previous 45 years. In 1870, they lost a Franco-Prussian war to Germany. In 1914, of course, they're invaded again. France wants a Germany that can never threaten them again. They literally want to break Germany into pieces and have those pieces occupied by French military. They don't ever want to see an intact Germany that can threaten France again. On the other side of the equation, you've got the United States and Britain. What do we want out of this negotiation?
A stable Germany we can trade with.
Very good. A stable and intact Germany that could be a trading partner with us going forward.
U.S. and U.K. both want that?
Yep. Now, what do you think the United States and the United Kingdom have in common compared to France? Why would we want a little bit of a looser treaty compared to what France wanted? Yeah, very good. We don't have to worry about an invasion from Germany. Britain doesn't have to worry about an invasion from Germany because we don't have any common borders. So it's a little easier for us to say, hey, let's take it easy on Germany. Let's not be too rough on them. So we want an intact Germany that we can do business with. Because this is what Woodrow Wilson thought in 1919. And this is what many American politicians think to this day. If countries do business with each other, if countries are economically interrelated, if there's more free trade between nations, there will be less war between nations. If we trade with Germany, if we have a relationship, if we have cultural exchanges with Germany, we're less likely to ever get into any war with them. And that was our hope. And that's still our hope today in 2017. With many countries, like China, for example. When we started having an economic relationship with China and eventually gave them what we call most favored nation status in the late 1970s, when we opened up trade relations and we started seeing for the first time made in China stickers on products we would buy in the United States, our relationship got much better. And today we're sitting in a situation with China where they own, like $6 trillion of American debt, and they made most of the phones that are in our pockets right now, where we've got a relationship where we both need each other. And it makes it much less likely that any conflict would ever arise, any serious conflict would arise between our nations. Because they need us, and we need them. So that was the thinking in 1919. That's the thinking in 2017. So here's what we get. Here's the treaty result that we ultimately get out of the Paris Peace Conference. 1, a League of Nations is established. We already know this. First 10 articles of the Treaty of Versailles make the League of Nations. And Germany's not invited. Germany will not be a member of the League of Nations. They eventually get in, but that's a story for our next class. So, League of Nations with no Germany. 2, see this bright green chunk of land here? That's called the Rhineland. The Rhine River is right in the middle of it. That's the land that borders France and Belgium. And when Germany invaded and started their Schlieffen Plan back in August of 1914, they invade Belgium through the Rhineland. That's where German armies have to go before they hop into their neighbors' countries. So the Rhineland will be demilitarized. No German army in the Rhineland. R-H-I-N-E, land. All one word, Rhineland. Next, the Saar, or the Saarland. S-A-A-R-L-A-N-D. The Saar is a rich coal-producing region of Germany. And the Treaty of Versailles dictates that for the next 15 years, that coal production will go to France.
What was it called?
The Saar, S-A-A-R, or the Saarland. So the coal production in the Saar will go to France for the next 15 years. And after 15 years, the people in the Saar will get to pick. Do you want to be Germany, or do you want to be a part of France? I'll save the spoiler on that one, on which way they're going to vote. We'll get that next class. In the east, guys, see this big black hunk of land right here? This is former German land that will be given to a new nation of Poland after World War I. In particular, up here in the north, this is called the Polish Corridor. The Polish Corridor, like a hallway, corridor. The Polish Corridor, which will give the new country of Poland access to the Baltic Sea in the north. So the Polish Corridor will be created. But look what making a Polish corridor does to Germany. Germany, 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 Germany. It bisects Germany. So now we have a new little chunk of Germany that was an older part of Germany. That will now be known as East Prussia. It's still Germany, but also known as East Prussia. But you can see the problem here. You've got East Prussians who are now not connected with the rest of Germany. And that's going to be problematic for the German people. And plus, there's a lot of German folks that live in here. A lot of German people that live in this Polish corridor. So they got to go. Or they'll be now living under a Polish government. Yeah, the port city of Danzig, or in Poland, Gdańsk, is going to become like an international free city. We'll talk about that later. No Anschluss. I don't know if I have it. You guys are going to learn a lot of German words. Anschluss. Anschluss. Lost my marker. I lose my marker? Yeah, that is the sound of music. I lost my marker. A-N-S-C-H-L-U-S-S. I lost my marker. Anybody see my marker around? Thank you, man. Thank you.
Oh, no.
Ugh. There's more of the throw than the catch. Anschluss. That thing at the end there, that's called the sharpest S. In German, it's like two S's. Anschluss. A-N-S-C-H-L-U-S-S. Anschluss is a German word meaning political union. And the Treaty of Versailles says no political union between Austria and Germany. So if Austria, the new country created after World War I, wants to become a part of Germany, it can't. It's against the rules. If Germany wants Austria, it can't. It's against the rules. Yes?
I've never actually understood why. Like, Austria has been a separate country for, like, even longer than Germany has been a country. So why now did they say, oh, you guys can't do the same?
The fear about, like, remember, France wanted to break Germany up. They don't want Germany to ever grow larger. And now, after the Treaty of Saint-Germain that broke up Austria-Hungary, Austria itself, let's go back to our map of Europe. Oh, no, I have it here. Where's my map? Yeah, let's go here. Let's go here. You guys see Austria right here? So this is a new Austria created after World War I. It's a landlocked tourist destination. It's in the mountains. There's not a lot of industry. There's not a lot going for Austria that's left here, and it's totally landlocked. So it would be beneficial for Germany and Austria, or Austria, to join with Germany. but each of them had it worked into their treaty. No, because we're not about making Germany bigger and stronger. We're about making it as weak as possible. So no political union for Austria.
Germany was so small with that. Small.
I mean, yeah, it's smaller than it used to be. So let's go back to here, and they will lose their colonies. Germany will lose their colonies. I already talked about how in the Pacific, Japan will take over German holdings. In Africa, Britain and France will divide German colonies. So no more empire for Germany. Next, the German army will be limited to 100,000 men total. That is really small. University of Michigan puts more than 100,000 men in, or 100,000 people in Michigan Stadium every Saturday.
So you can fit the entire German
You could have put the entire German army inside that stadium bowl. To give you some context to this 100,000 man army, when Germany, and don't have to write this, just hear it. In June of 1941, Germany is going to invade the Soviet Union, all right, to turn the war against the Soviets. When they do that, they invade the Soviet Union with nearly 4 million men. So 4 million men by 1941 will be invading the Soviet Union for Germany. The Treaty of Versailles said their army couldn't even be 100, or could only be 100,000 men. So this is a very small army, especially when you are a country that now has Poland and Czechoslovakia. Austrian border they're not too worried about. France, Belgium to deal with, right? Netherlands. They've got a lot of borders that would need defending. 100,000 men doesn't go very far. The Navy for Germany would be limited to only 6 battleships and no submarines. Only 6 so very small Navy compared to the British or the French. And no submarines. If you recall in World War I, the German submarine or U-boat, or Unterseeboot, German and English, they're both Germanic languages, obviously, and so a lot of our words really hop across languages pretty easily. So an undersea boat, or Unterseeboot, is a underwater boat. It's a submarine, same thing. So no submarines. The German submarine was devastating to Allied shipping in World War I. Spoiler, it's going to be in World War II as well. We didn't allow them to have any. No Air Force. The Air Force in Germany is called the Luftwaffe. This is the Luft is the German word for air. So anybody fly in Europe on a plane, on an airline called Lufthansa? You might have heard that. Air is the German word, or Luft. Yeah. So no Air Force. Germany is forced to sign the War Guilt Clause. Article 231 of the Treaty of Versailles is the War Guilt Clause. They had to accept responsibility for this war. And then by accepting responsibility, now they can be made responsible or culpable, fancy word for being responsible. What? Oh, awesome. Now they're responsible for paying for the costs of the war. So now that they've accepted responsibility for the war, you can charge them for reparations. Reparations to pay back Britain and France and Belgium for the costs of the war. That's a lot. It's a lot of punishments. So what Germany's really left with is the worst case scenario going forward, right? France wanted to destroy the German country so it could never assemble an invasion force again. The British and the Americans wanted to keep Germany together so they can be a viable economic partner. The compromise, what it did was kept Germany together, but levied such horrible punishments against Germany that it would be bitter and angry and never be able to economically rebound, or at least it'll take a long time. So you left together an angry Germany that might very well want revenge and can possibly get that revenge. Compromises. It doesn't work out for anybody, right? All right. Now we move on to this guy. There's a younger Adolf Hitler as a soldier in the German army, and then a young political operative in the National German Workers' Party. So we'll talk about Adolf Hitler now. Adolf Hitler is Austrian born. He's born in Austria. Side note, who probably more than anybody else would like Austria and Germany to be one country? Hitler. Now, when the Treaty of Versailles, when the Paris Peace Conference adds in the Anschluss Clause, nobody knows who this guy is. He's nothing. He's insignificant. They didn't do it because of him. But that's going to be one of the biggest points of the Treaty of Versailles that will anger a guy like Adolf Hitler. We're not going to get in Adolf Hitler's childhood, youth, family. I don't care about any of that stuff. I don't care that he was a failed art student, like he tried to get into art school. Oh my gosh, if there's one college acceptance that could have been made, that might have changed world history, right? But that doesn't matter for us. Yes?
Sorry, Chris, I know. I was looking at some college essays. Somebody actually wrote a college essay where something similar happened to them and they got accepted into Stanford. But that was just she was like, oh, like look at the power of like a single acceptance, and then she was like, I had a dream about not getting accepted into Stanford and then going to India, and exactly.
Wow, that sounds like a good way to not get into Stanford.
Exactly, and then she had a dream of where she did get accepted into Stanford. And she's like, how did you get straight?
I am no expert on college admissions, but I would just stay away from even mentioning Hitler. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Do they even bring that up? Like, is that a literal recommendation or no? Okay. I would say it's probably safe though. All right. So what we care about him is he was an Austrian guy. When World War I begins, he hops the border from Austria into Germany. Which, hey, if there's ever an argument for a strong southern border wall, right? He hops the border from Austria into Bavaria. Bavaria is the big German state in southern Germany. You guys know Bavarian Motor Works, BMW cars. It's a German company from the south of Germany. So Hitler goes into Germany and he joins a Bavarian regiment. This was probably a pretty good decision on his part. Because if he remained an Austrian and fought in the Austrian army, he had a much greater chance that he wouldn't have survived the war intact. Austrian soldiers died and were wounded at a greater clip than German soldiers in the First World War. So he goes to Germany and he joins a Bavarian regiment, and he fights honorably throughout the duration of the First World War. He wins an Iron Cross, so he fights with distinction. He's wounded in battle. He actually is wounded in a gas attack. But all that doesn't matter. He survives the war. He's one of these German veterans that is deeply angry and resentful about fighting and losing so much in this war and then giving up in November of 1918. He's a guy that believes in this stab-in-the-back theory, that the German army wasn't really defeated. It was German politicians, in particular socialists and Jews, who pulled Germany out of the war early and stabbed the German people in the back. So he's a guy that espouses this stab-in-the-back theory. He refers to the socialist government that signs the Treaty of Versailles. He refers to them as the November criminals. He believes the Treaty of Versailles is merely a diktat, a dictated treaty that Germany was forced to sign, that they had no power in negotiating. And he's kind of right? It was dictated to them. But his disgust with the results of the war, with the end of the war, with the Treaty of Versailles, they radicalize Adolf Hitler and they politicize Adolf Hitler. He wasn't really a political guy before the war. Now he certainly is. After the war, still as a part of the German army, he is sent by the new German government. And let me note that new German government we are going to call the Weimar government. The Weimar government, W-E-I-M-A-R. In German, W's are pronounced like V's, and V's are pronounced like F's. So this Weimar government, it's called the Weimar government because that's where they write their constitution, in the German city of Weimar. So this new government will send Adolf Hitler, they'll give him a job. And his job is to go and investigate political movements in Germany. and to keep an eye out for left-wing subversion. Now, left-wing subversion, that's a fancy way to say keep your eyes open for communists. Everybody in the 1920s was afraid of communist takeovers, right? It happened in Russia. It could happen anywhere else. We talked about how the Japanese government had its severely anti-communist movements. We talked about how the fascist party in Italy grew because of anti-communist sentiments. You talked last year about a Red Scare in the United States after World War I. Yeah.
And they're also afraid of the communists because it happened once. It happened twice because in 1919 the Spartacist Revolution tried to overthrow and make
Very good.
And then Bavaria seceded to become the Socialist Republic of Bavaria in 1920.
Right. So there were already, and that goes a little deeper than our class needs to go, but there were already movements in Germany that supported communism and communist takeovers of the German government. So Hitler is sent to investigate political parties to make sure they're not going the way of the communists. And so he will go and investigate a party known as the German Workers' Party. In attending these meetings of the German Workers' Party, Hitler starts to like what he hears. And he will very quickly go from investigating this party to joining this party to becoming a vocal leader of this party. So Adolf Hitler will join this German Workers' Party and become a young and vocal leader of that. He will rename the party the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And the abbreviation Nazi just comes from the German word National. So the Nazi Party, as we would call it, just gets its abbreviation from the National. So the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Under Hitler's tutelage, they will adopt a symbol, an identifying symbol, and that is the swastika. S-W-A-S-T-I-K-A. I don't care that this is an ancient symbol that's been seen in Hinduism and Buddhism and all over the world. It doesn't matter. It's adopted by the Nazis, and now it has become a symbol that is now indelibly tied to the Nazi Party.
Just turn 45 degrees.
This young Nazi Party will organize a paramilitary organization known as the SA, or the Brown Shirts. Remember the fascists in Italy, they had the black shirts as like an intimidation force. For Nazi Germany, it is their brown shirts, known as stormtroopers. Yes, that is why George Lucas called those guys in the white armor stormtroopers for the Galactic Empire. There's all kinds of Nazi iconic... Nazi illusions, yeah, thank you. Within the Empire in Star Wars. Even their uniforms, the uniforms of the officers of the Galactic Empire are modeled off of the Nazi uniforms. Anyhow, so now there's a paramilitary organization that can intimidate. They've got an active political party. And Hitler now will begin to work on the foreign policy goals that will drive his ideology. I'm going to give you those goals, and then we'll wrap it up for today. First, the Nazi Party and Adolf Hitler support the idea of pan-Germanism. Pan-Germanism, or all Germans being a part of one German nation. So that would take the Germans in Germany, and then the Germans in Austria, and then the Germans that happen to live in part of Czechoslovakia, and the Germans that live in the former Polish corridor, and make them all ethnic, national Germans again. So a pan-Germanism, Germany for German-speaking people. You guys can see it on the board. This can also be called in German, Großdeutschland, big Germany. What's that? There's two of them. G-R-O-S-S.
No, SS. That one.
Oh, the sharp SS? I guess I didn't. So, Großdeutschland, a Germany for German-speaking people, or you can call it Greater Germany if you want. a unification of all German-speaking people. Hitler also calls for the racial purity of this German nation.
Is that number one still or number?
Number two. Second goal. Racial purity of the German nation. This kind of comes on the heels of the work of social Darwinists that had already been writing in Europe. The belief that this, according to Hitler's mind, this Aryan race, and you see the word on the back there, this Aryan race of Germans, these Northern European Germanic peoples, were at the pinnacle of the world's races. And that everything below them was just what would be referred to as Untermensch. The Untermensch, like the undermen, like as opposed to Übermensch, the Superman. These are like the subhumans of Europe. So that would be the Jews that were living within Germany, the Slavic peoples in Eastern Europe, Russians, Poles, Ukrainians, Gypsies. Anybody living in Eastern Europe that didn't fit into this Aryan master race according to Hitler's worldview. They would need to be exterminated, eliminated, moved. And then once you create your greater Germany and you drive out your undesirable populations, Adolf Hitler needed the acquisition of Lebensraum. Yeah. Lebensraum, or living room, or living space for the German people. This would come in Eastern Europe. This would be Poland. This would be the Soviet Union. Land that the German people, the 85 million German people, land that they could populate, land that they could spread into and settle. Much like the United States got to settle our frontier in the West and send pioneers and settlers out to turn that land into productive land for the United States, they needed land to turn into productive land for the German nation. According to Hitler's worldview and the Nazi Party, there were some natural enemies to this German state. Russia at the foreground, or the Soviet Union at the foreground. The Soviet Union had a large Jewish minority. The Soviet Union was a communist nation. And as such, that needed to be ended. And then also France on the other side. France, to avenge the Treaty of Versailles and the loss in World War I. As possible allies for Germany going forward, obviously Benito Mussolini down in Italy. The fascists in Italy share some similar ideologies to the Nazis in Europe, except for the whole racial hang-up. The fascists in Italy didn't have a racial component to it like the Nazis will. And then Britain. Adolf Hitler was actually quite fond of Britain, and especially the British Empire that they had created. So he did not see Britain as a possible enemy going forward. And maybe they could even be an ally.